Right now, there's an AI disclosure on Steam that says that the game doesn't use AI. That does sound like a joke, but it isn't. The game's called Crime Scene Cleaner. It was a proper hit that then got hammered with AI accusations. Now, the studio's defense was, we don't make AI art. We buy assets, and no one on Earth can prove what's inside those. And so, 20 months after their game's launch, they decided to file the disclosure anyway, just to be safe. So now we're in a funky place where players are angry, devs are nervous, and everyone is asking if, say, asset packs that they thought were safe now need a full audit. It is chaos out there. But the good news is someone has managed to map that chaos with a census of every single disclosed game on Steam. And the timing of that actually matters because in the last 6 months, the situation with AI has, in fact, materially changed and in a way that will impact video games quite a bit. Until recently, AI's promise in game development was, as most people saw it, bad image generation pretending to be gameplay, right? Those shitty AI video things. Obvious, barely coherent slop that nobody really wanted. But you may remember how Steam changed their rules on AI disclosures earlier this year. You see, that's when Gen AI coding agents got good enough to genuinely change aspects of software engineering. You could ask one of these to build a game and it will go, write code, build assets, orchestrate this with a big fleet of agents, and run it all through a game engine. They can identify and fix bugs in many cases. It's honestly insane compared to where we were 6 months ago. And that means we're no longer talking about games that are actually just generated images in sequence. We are talking about prototypes, like say this one, a space sim called Long Silence that was built by somebody running Claude Opus 5 in a big old loop for 24 hours. Certainly, the sorts of things that look impressive on like a viral X post are really just toy demos that can go viral. They're not really things that are like good, long-term, extensible software engineering for a real game project. No one's going to be out there one-shotting a game overnight. Though, the software engineering side of things, well, that actually could impact games quite a bit, because in the world of coding, there actually seems to be product-market fit for these models. Very much unlike, say, a lot of the bad customer support experiences people have had, or the torrents of image gen slop. So at least for now, we're quite a long way from, say, Elon Musk's claim that XAI will be generating games at scale customized to you by 2027. You can find some of these things fascinating or repellent, well, whatever you wish, but either way, this is why Steam are mandating disclosures of anything AI that is player-facing. And we now actually know that Steam are enforcing this. Devs told Game Discover Co., Steam is checking, Steam is catching it. And in one case, Steam was actually able to pick up that a background artist had used some Gen AI stuff for their art when the actual dev didn't even notice themselves. And that means that these Steam disclosure numbers actually do mean something. And the scenario they point to, that by 2028, 50% of all games on Steam could have an AI disclosure. That's a big number. You're probably wondering where it comes from. That's what we'll do next. That scenario comes from a developer called Sycophantic. Basically, he's a co-founder of Mainframe Industries, who currently make a game called PAX Day, but he was formerly a design lead on, of all things, Habbo Hotel. He put out a pair of blog posts that were crunching the numbers on every single game with a Gen AI disclosure on Steam, a census of the entire population going right back to when the disclosure started in 2024. And what he found, oh boy, it is that AI games are growing really fast. In some ways. A month after disclosures became mandatory, 7% of new game releases had one. But as of today, 1 in 3 game releases has a disclosure. And if you extend that trend, you get Harrow's 50% by 2028 number. Now remember, disclosure is only needed for player-facing generated work. And that would mean, in the case of, say, the prototypes I showed you earlier, that those would count. Though they wouldn't count for their code, it would be for the other things. But going back to the numbers, what we see is clear growth. And in fact, AI games have accounted for, wait for this, all growth on Steam since 2024, at least by volume of new games. But you probably are aware that volume of new games on the platform may not correlate to, say, where people are actually spending their money. But first, let's work out who the hell's making these things. New devs who aren't making games with AI have kept to around 950 games a month since Disclosure started. But AI disclosed games from first-timers have actually risen from 140 a month to 440. They're the ones that are actually increasing, and those devs are actually way more likely to keep shipping. 22% ship a second game versus only 14% of non-AI disclosed devs, and they're 3 times more likely to ship 5 games. Now, for the most part, the games themselves are small-scale affairs, and so are the people behind them. It looks like people kind of bootstrapped with their LLM subscription, not publisher funding. 85% are actually self-published. That's because many publishers don't want to get involved. And by many, well, I mean 80%. 80% of publishers on Steam have never had a disclosure, and of the 20% who have, 89% of those have only got one. And it does all make sense, right? It almost feels like the Unity asset flip days are kinda back, as these terrible games just fill up the store. But it's actually not quite that simple. Harrow looked at reviews for every game that got more than 10 reviews. Now, most AI games review worse than the non-AI games, but it's not that much worse. On average, the AI games sit at 77% positive, whereas everywhere else, it's 81%. Now, broadly, there's a 4 to 6 point review penalty right up until games pass 80% positive. Above that line, the share of non-AI games climbs really, really fast. Now, is it maybe because these games are cheap slop that you don't feel offended by? Kind of the opposite. You see, the median AI game is $4.99, $1 under everything else, and they barely charge any more than $20. And price actually sets the size of the review penalty. Cheap AI games have a 3-point review penalty, and past $20, it is 8 points, which certainly makes sense to me. The second a dev asks you for more money, any hint of poor quality from AI just hits way harder. What we've learned is it's not really a question of just low-quality shovelware being pumped out. These games do seem to have at least a baseline quality for the people who buy them, and I imagine that for the people who buy them little caveat is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. But yeah, we basically see that a low price takes the sting out of the complaints. But cost only explains part of this. The rest comes down to the types of games that AI is used to make. AI clusters where content is cheap. And Harrow basically is able to see this in the genre data. We see the trading card games top the chart with 39% of them disclosing AI use versus 18% of games overall. And you can see why. Card art can be templated, the gameplay is systemic rather than, say, relying on a dev team making loads of handcrafted content. Now, if you flip that to genres where craft is the real selling point, the AI rate collapses. Only 9% of hand-drawn games carry an AI disclosure, 10% of cozy games do, 7% of Metroidvanias do. You can basically see what's going on, and it is, as Harrow puts it, that AI stays away from anything that is defined by craft, skill, or hardware. Hardly a glowing assessment, but what's interesting is if you cross-genre with reviews, you find that strangest of all, quality and sales have decoupled. What sells, right, is content-hungry systems games, the likes of Sims, management, adult titles. They rate at a middling 73 to 83%. Platformers actually rate best, at 86 to 90%, but they get barely any sales. Only 2 or 3% were able to reach Harrow's 3,000 sales sort of barrier of a game being basically decently successful. And what that amounts to, in his own words, is that the highest rated AI games are commercial dead ends. Now, I'd say that some of that is just saturation, of course. In a market that's already crowded with, say, platformer games, an AI disclosure may be one way to get people to ignore your game. And that's why some developers have tried to find ways to make the disclosures work for them. Because they want you to know that they kind of feel bad, or at least mixed, about what they're disclosing. You see, when Harrow reviewed successful AI games versus flopped AI games, there was at least one clear trend. Of those who succeeded in spite of a disclosure, 59% used what he calls minimizing language. So that's words like assist, auxiliary, supplementary. You can see how those kind of minimize the role. Although I would say that, those words can be used honestly as well, rather than just a tactic to minimize. And I think the point there is people can basically understand, right, if that's like a helper, but, by and large, you have actually went and made the thing, I think it's pretty obvious that at least some people will be more sympathetic to that. So that covers 59% of them. But 21% explicitly stated that a human reviewed the outputs in some way. You'd bloody well hope so. But rather oddly, he found that some used the disclosure to deny using AI. And if that sounds familiar, well, that's the crime scene cleaner play. But if you compare the winners to the flops, it actually gets way more interesting because only 41% of the flops used minimizing language, and only 12% overtly stated human review. One thing we appear to see from this is that when the disclosure meets the audience's skepticism and worry, then it does seem to work out better for the devs. Obviously, the devs know you want a reason to play the game, and if it feels like the devs understand your concern, then yeah, the game probably will sell better. But sell better is perhaps a little bit misleading. And that's because, like everything else in Steam, most of these games just do not sell basically at all. Across all 53,000 games in the census, AI or not, the top 1% took 94% of the revenue. And if you look at it by quarter, right, you find that the top 2 AI-flagged games are taking between 45 to 79% of all AI game revenue. That's games like, say, Arc Raiders or Crimson Desert coming in there being big, hyper-marketed AAA games that are, for their audiences, absolutely fantastic. So they're carrying the average up for the AI games. And if you strip those out, you see that the AI sales share has grown from 3 to 6% for a quarter to now between 10 and 27%. But that's actually well under AI's share of launches, which is 33%. So we see that launches are growing faster than revenue per launch. And to try and benchmark this a bit more properly, Harrow set a bar of around 3,000 sales, and he compared games that released in the same month. And when he did that, he found that AI games clear that threshold at 55% the rate of everyone else. And thus far, that rate has stayed flat whilst volume has increased. So in short, the hit rate hasn't got better, and all the revenue growth is basically coming from there being more games, not really better games that on average are selling way more. And to continue the grim numbers, well, the median AI game with any reviews earns a rather whopping $300. Now for the whole platform, according to Gamealytic, the median is $707. That's way worse. And we see that 28% of AI games never even get a review, compared to just over 10% of Steam games overall. So what that basically means is, it's super hard to get your game noticed, and it's even harder if it has an AI disclosure, it would seem. And so, if a dev builds their game like full, Gen AI build, they're probably not recouping the costs of their LLM subscription. But while they're broadly worse off than the non-AI devs, the actual dynamic that we see of Steam being quite winner takes all, well, that does hold true for everyone. We've taken a lovely stroll through the numbers, so let's bring it all home with the full picture. Currently, a third of new games in Steam disclose use of AI. Almost none of those games sell. And if you rank each month's releases by review count, and you take the top 100, only 9% of them are AI flagged. And actually, by mid-2026, the gap has widened. AI is 37% of all releases, but only 11% of the winners, per, of course, Harrow's 3,000-ish sales benchmark. There are spikes in the data, but the spikes are caused by outliers, like, say, Arc Raiders. Then, the 500 or so AI games that we see a month, they do seem like a flood, but the simple fact is that Steam has been flooded with new games for a decade now. And over that decade, Valve has largely solved the problem. The algorithm buries most games that were never really going to sell. It can make mistakes, I guess, but it does push Slop down. And when we isolate to the AI games that have won, well, we see hedging language and disclosures, a higher chance of there being a publisher attached, and fairly clever genre selection to take advantage of audience interests. Otherwise, Steam filters them out like any other game that Steam does not expect to sell. The disclosure data then seems to suggest that these games have underperformed their competition for the last few years. But think back to those prototypes, and think to the changes that have happened within the last year. Now, the final quality will come down entirely to their own skill, but the barrier to entry to do a lot of the technical side of game development, the code bit, that is now just the cost of a subscription and learning how to orchestrate agents. Now, the thing is, that mode of working is fairly new within software engineering. It is not diffused out super broadly, and it's not massively diffused into the game space. We may see things change, though we may not see that in the actual disclosures on Steam, because the disclosures are for player-facing content. And that raises a question for many people buying games on Steam. There may not be a disclosure there, but the developer may have used basically agentic engineering to do a bunch of the engineering work behind their game. Is that okay with you? Is it not okay with you? That's totally your choice. But what I think will stay constant is that games are bits of art that are made by people. If, say, those people are doing agentic engineering to deal with some of the software engineering part of making their game, but they're by and large just using that as a tool, and the game is very much their own authored thing with their own craft, and it actually does look and feel just like any other game, right? Then I think those games will be successful because people want a really good game. If, though, people get so impressed with what the technology can do that they maybe lose sight of games as art or games as a thing that you actually sell to a customer, and they basically get blinded by hype, well then what you're obviously going to see is sloppy shovelware on Steam. That may be annoying, but as it turns out, Steam has already solved that problem, and the algorithm basically murders those games. Now, to say the obvious, those prototypes I showed earlier on are not things ready for commercial sales, though that hasn't exactly stopped other types of AI product that would look like Slop. The dev's promise is that the games and the tech will only get better, but part of that future will be dependent on the tech scaling, how much things generalize, how data center buildouts happen or don't happen, and everything else about the AI economy actually holding. And then, most importantly, on audiences changing their taste and reversing the trends that we've seen over the last 3 years. A word of advice to Team AI from me. If you want people to accept this technology, don't ram an early version of it down their throat while saying it's for their own good. Just like, say, Tim Sweeney of Epic Games, with this groundbreaking new voice in Fortnite.
Hello there. This is a sample of this voice.
Hello there. This is a sample of this voice.
Yeah, it really does sound that bad. And if you want to see the rest of the story, simply watch the next video.